I'm gonna drive all night. I'm gonna drive all night.
My name is Adrian and I can drive, and happy Pride to start this off. Today I am going to do a little video essay basically just exploring obsession through the lens of like borderline personality disorder as someone with borderline personality disorder or BPD, because I don't know if it's just me, but I've been seeing so many like memes and like jokes online about how obsession isn't really that scary if you've ever dated a girl with BPD or even like a Latina. And I'm also a Latina, so I don't know. We're not exploring the Latina side of it, but I just kind of wanted to go ahead and put my own thoughts out there, things I've noticed. I have a little notebook I've made from things that I noticed while rewatching the movie. So yeah, these are all just my thoughts. But first and foremost, I do have a disclaimer. One, I'm using a filter because my makeup doesn't look that good today. And also like my hair is low-key crazy, but I've been avoiding making this video, and I really just wanted to go ahead and do it while the hype was still happening. And then another disclaimer, I do know and also just truly believe Obsession is not a film about BPD. Obsession is a film that explores the loss of autonomy, the loss of like being able to go ahead and make your own choices and decisions. And that's the whole point of the One Wish Willow, taking away Nikki's ability to choose whether or not she does love Bear and going out with him or not. So that was just my only disclaimer for this video. Of course, there's also going to be trigger warnings, spoiler warnings. I'm not going to summarize Obsession just because I'm lazy, but I will just also be going ahead and explaining BPD a little bit more for those that may not know it. So historically, BPD is defined as a personality disorder characterized by unstable moods, behavior, and relationships. Typically, in order to be diagnosed with BPD, you do have to show at least, I believe it is 5 out of the 9 symptoms, and those 9 symptoms are typically labeled as a strong fear of abandonment, unstable relationships, a poor or distorted self-image, dangerous or impulsive behaviors, self-harming or thoughts of suicide, rapid mood changes, anger issues, dissociated feelings, and also can sometimes be like distrust of others. So all of those symptoms are, not all of them are required in order to be diagnosed with BPD, but yeah, that is sort of like the kind of lens I'm characterizing this movie in this video with. And also to go ahead and put in my own experiences as well. I also just want to highlight BPD is also a very highly stigmatized disorder. Even now, some people nowadays are avoiding telling their psychiatrists or psychologists that they have BPD due to the fact that even some mental health providers and even just like general hospital caretakers can avoid those types of patients or even just discriminate against them even though they're not supposed to, but just due to the stigmatization of this disorder. So all of this to say, this movie and like me analyzing it through this lens doesn't necessarily mean that all people with BPD are like this, or it doesn't even mean like BPD means you can't have a healthy relationship. This is more so BPD that maybe hasn't been diagnosed just yet, or unstable BPD where it's like the person is not trying to receive treatment or anything like that. So the first part of the movie that I really want to explore, just to go ahead and get into it, is when Nikki is talking about her story in the car. Now this is pre-Wish Nikki, so this is normal Nikki, but she's basically talking about the book that she's writing and mentions love, and Bear goes, "Love? It's a romance?" And Nikki responds, "No, it's not a romance. It's a love story." So I think this distinction, while especially small, is actually kind of pretty big, because those with borderline personality disorder typically tend to make romantic relationships or their romantic partners the number one important thing in their life. So in a way, it's like saying school, work, family, etc. All of that doesn't really matter in the scheme of things compared to finding like your favorite person and like kind of living happily ever after. So in a way, I interpreted this as it's basically kind of saying the romance itself in the story is kind of the entire thing. Like, it is a love story because it's a story primarily focusing on that, in the same way that our lives are love stories in themselves as well. Or essentially just like saying love is much more larger and so much more consuming than just simply being a romance. It is a whole novel, it's a whole story. It has so many things that have to do with it as well. I'm not sure if that part exactly made sense, but I promise I will be much clearer as the video goes on, and also as I maybe make potential future essays as well. Also, feel free to correct me on this in the comments, but while making this video, I wanted to make sure I was going ahead and quoting things correctly. So I pulled up the script, and I don't believe this portion of the script was actually in the movie, or at least it was cut from the original movie. So I just wanted to go ahead and read it off as well. Bear goes ahead and tells Nikki, "Isn't that a romance?" And Nikki responds, "I don't think romance is real. I think love is real, but not romance. Romance makes life feel magical, like in movies. Then your parents split, or they're so miserable you wish they would. People start telling you love fades. It's a mirage. They're wrong. Romance fades. Love is a different thing, and that's what I want to write. The good, the bad, the ugly." So I thought that was also really interesting, the fact that it was cut from the movie, but also just to see current Nikki's perspective. And please excuse my stutter throughout the video as well. I can't fix that about myself like I can a filter with my face, unfortunately. Another thing I do want to point out later on is when Nikki says, "Actually, you could use some company tonight. I mean, I did just lose my cat, Bear." When, of course, as we know, Bear was the one that lost his cat. So Bear responds, "You lost your cat?" And she replies, "Oh, wait, I mean, you lost your cat. I'm sorry. I am so sorry for your loss. Are you?" So I saw this as being very empathetic towards feelings, because although BPD can be such a hard disorder to live with, many people with BPD actually find it very easy to go ahead and put themselves into others' shoes, just because they can feel things so much. The best way I've had describing it is it's almost like having third-degree emotional burns. Similar to how those with third-degree burns easily go ahead and get hurt at the slightest touch by anything else. People with BPD don't have the toughest emotional skin. So even the smallest things can feel like we're almost being sliced open in terms of our emotions. So I think it was, at least in the lens of BPD, this is almost a way of her saying, "I feel your pain here. I understand how it feels." Even though she didn't actually lose her cat, I think that's why it was a slip of the tongue. I cut the video and accidentally lost the filter I was using before, so this is a new one. My apologies. But as for the next part, when Nikki is finally under the influence of the wish, so I'm gonna call her Wish Nikki from now on, she's of course like kind of freaking Bear out a lot, and he says, "Nikki, you're kind of freaking me out." And in the script it specifically says Nikki's body language returns to normal, and then she responds in a disappointed tone, "Really?" Throughout the movie, she also continues to act the same way. Her demeanor instantly drops, her face will drop, and she'll do her iconic frown. And I think that in itself is also very important in the lens of BPD, just because people with BPD tend to react very strongly when it comes to their feelings being hurt as well. There's actually this term called BPD eyes, where those with BPD may unintentionally actually dissociate or kind of have their eyes glaze over when that's happening, as sort of a protection method to kind of get them checked out from the situation in order to keep their emotions from exploding. So I thought this was very interesting, especially because like the gaze of her eyes in the lighting that we have during the movie as well. And then once again, another portion is, or quote is, "I don't think I can be alone right now." When Bear is actually trying to go ahead and tell her to go inside because she's being weird, he doesn't want to take her to his house, even though he obviously has this big crush on her, but he's worried about her, and she responds with that. That is something I have said a lot as someone with BPD, and I'm actually going to connect this to a later part of the movie as well as we go on, as I'm trying to do this in chronological order based off of my notes. But regardless of her emotions, those with BPD, when they have a favorite person, which Definition coming up. Favorite person in the terms of BPD is an individual someone with BPD relies on most for emotional support, validation, and stability. This bond often triggers intense attachment, making the person with BPD heavily dependent on their FP to regulate their daily mood. Those with FPs typically can unintentionally make it a toxic relationship, whether it be a romantic or platonic one, just because of the fact that it essentially does become codependency. Those with BPD may go ahead and rely on them for whenever they are having a huge mood shift, such as being extremely sad, extremely mad, and then if that person is unavailable, if that person isn't with them or isn't answering their calls, that can go ahead and trigger an intense emotional attack in the person with BPD, which can go ahead and cause them to go from idealizing that person to immediately hating that person. So it's a bit confusing, but just because of that, most people with BPD will go ahead and want to be physically there with their FP. So saying, I don't think I can be alone right now in a time where Nikki doesn't seem okay makes complete sense when you're viewing this movie through that kind of lens. Oh my god, now it's time for the sex scene. The sex scene, I have so many thoughts about that. In my notes, I have fake noises, eyes dead, and she just has a dead expression, and she's faking obviously for the sake of Bear. The sex scene in itself, also, I would just like to say, obviously in the course of the movie, it's SA. As she's lost her autonomy to say yes, she can consent with this wish. But when we're focusing on it through BPD, it kind of becomes more focused on focusing on your partner rather than you experiencing pleasure for yourself. Many people with BPD may go ahead and fake on purpose and make those fake noises because they want to please their partner, even if they themselves aren't feeling pleasured or feeling good from it. As a result, they're essentially putting their partner's feelings above their own for the sake of that. Now, I want to talk about the restaurant scene. The restaurant scene is very interesting, of course, because that's kind of where we first see Nikki's breakdown and find out about her father not actually being sick. But one core part of the movie, which once again the script kind of goes off of what we actually see in the movie, is Nikki giving Bear something very important in her family. So I'm going to read the script off as follows. Nikki. It's a quartz, a tiger's eye, a beet, Bear. Wow. Nikki. It was my mom's, then it was mine. It's supposed to bring you confidence and willpower. So now you can be a food critic. Bear. Why are you giving it to me? Nikki. Bear, the stone's important to me. Well, you know, after my dad left, a beet. Bear. So why are you giving it to me? Nikki. Because you're important to me. Bear thinks. He grabs the stone and holds it against his chest. Bear. So you love me? Nikki. Bear, I love you so much. I don't think I could live without you. So this part of the movie screamed BPD. The alarm bells are running in my head just because people with BPD fall in love insanely fast. That's what can especially lead to an FP connection so easily, just because they idealize them so much, they don't see their flaws. So as a result, it's easy to become instantly attached, even if you've only known or even been dating that person for example, like a week. So it makes sense for someone who feels so connected, so attached, to go ahead and give these personal family heirlooms to someone like Bear. Although in this case, I would say it's because she also has known him for a while as friends. It's not said in the movie how long they've known each other, but I imagine normal Nikki wouldn't just go ahead and be giving out her family heirloom like that if she and Bear had just started dating. Later on during the same date, Nikki is confronted by Bear about her father not actually being sick. In response, Nikki says, no, 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 no. Nikki abruptly gets up from the table. Bear, what? Nikki, no, don't do that. The restaurant slips into a hushed, uneasy silence, all eyes on them, the air charged with discomfort. Bear, what? Sit down, please. Nikki, why does it matter, Bear? Bear, what do you mean? Bear looks around embarrassed. Nikki, I thought we were having a nice date. And of course, my performance doesn't exactly show the escalation that happens in the actual movie scene, but if you've seen the movie, you understand what I mean. And essentially, this goes to show, at least I think, how easily those with BPD can fall into a emotional breakdown just from small little sentences. Although in this case, I'm not sure if Bear confronting her is so small, but it just shows just how much it has affected her to the fact that she's low-key tweaking out a little bit. I'm not sure if I used that one correctly, but yeah, you get what I mean. Some other sentences that I really connected to during this movie was throughout the entire bed scene, when at first she's seen watching Bear sleep, she says, "I feel like you don't love me as much as I do. It's not mutual." And she's crying and she can't sleep, and Bear tells her to go back to sleep, but she says like no, essentially. And I took that as not wanting to be a bother, because sometimes with BPD myself, I would have my own thoughts, and rather than communicating, I would go ahead and keep them in, because I didn't want my partner to know just just how far my thoughts went, or especially when I split, which, vocabulary time. Splitting in BPD is a psychological defense mechanism involving extreme black and white or all or nothing thinking. An individual who is splitting sees themselves, others, or situations as entirely all good or entirely all bad. So, while splitting can also go ahead and apply to yourself, such as possibly thinking, I am so bad at drawing, for example, and kind of hating on yourself for that. That can go ahead and happen with BPD on yourself. But it can also happen towards individuals, especially FPs. Because the individual with BPD is idealizing them so much, it's very easy sometimes once the honeymoon period has passed, where if, for example, the FP says they're too busy and can't see their partner today, then the individual with BPD may begin splitting, thinking they hate me, they don't want anything to do with me. There's no kind of middle ground where it's just a thought of, oh, they're very tired from work or something like that. So it can also sometimes just be frightening to go ahead and want to explain that those feelings are going on, and sometimes also may begin thinking that you yourself are a burden for having those thoughts. So, at least in the perspective of BPD, Nikki didn't want to be a bother and instead told him to go back to sleep. I messed that part up. Nikki told Bear to go back to sleep, not him telling her. Sorry, I had to for this upcoming scene that I'm talking about. The flower scene. A lot of people have had very interesting interpretations of that part of the movie. Regardless of the, at least I think, original intention of the movie, there's been so many different ways to view this. But with BPD, I kind of see it in the same light I was kind of explaining just now, with the flowers being Nikki trying to look beautiful, or like in her honeymoon phase, trying to remind Bear of like the good moments that they were having, where it looked all pretty and nice and everything was just good. But in turn, she's also ignoring the splitting and the sadness inside the real her. And that's the part that she doesn't want Bear to see in order to continue the good parts of the relationship. God, my nose is greasy. Sorry. And the part of the movie that really freaked me out, at least like so far when I was watching it, was when Bear calls One Wish Willow and gets asked, do you want to talk to her? And Nikki just is there screaming. That scared the crap out of me. But I think it also goes to show how people with BPD may be feeling on the inside, or at least like the real me versus the split me. We can't always control our way of thinking. The best way actually to go ahead and put those with BPD into remission, or at least the symptoms into remission, is to use a form of therapy called DBT. But in order to use DBT and other like therapeutic methods, the first step is kind of realizing when you are splitting or having intense emotional moments in order to stop that behavior and redirect it. But because of that being just so instinctual, it can also be really hard, and almost like the person screaming is, at least in this case, the person with BPD's thoughts about how this isn't really them, and they don't want to have those thoughts anymore, or those fears of paranoia of the person leaving that lead to splitting, but it's still there and they're kind of forced to just deal with it. I could talk about the duct tape door scene, but I also feel like it speaks for itself. So I guess I'll actually talk about it. The duct tape is essentially just like the fear of leaving and wanting that person to stay with you the whole time in order to avoid the risk altogether of them leaving and never coming back. Tying back to the fear of paranoia that people are going to leave you. Yes. Okay, next one. The next scene I will be discussing is the one where the one where Bear comes home and we see Wish Nikki come back to life, almost like reanimated. She's like, oh my god, Bear, you're back. But we also see that she has had an accident, and it seems like she's been standing there almost the entirety of the day when Bear was gone. And I saw this as the world stopping when your FP leaving. Some people may get very depressed and not take care of themselves, which can even include like if a FP will not respond to texts or calls. It almost feels like your world stops and you really can't do anything, even like focus on other things, because you want that person's attention and love so bad. And then you can also go ahead and get lost in the thoughts of, this really means they don't love me. This really means they're leaving me. So altogether, it can make it really hard to go ahead and function as normal without the presence of your FP when your BPD is at a level that bad. Now, the next scene I'm discussing is when Ian and Bear are talking, and Bear is basically like, Nikki is fine, like she's going through it, but she's fine. And Ian is like, no, she's not. You're taking advantage of her. She's having a crazy mental breakdown, which is a conversation I've actually had a couple of times due to my disorder as well. There's a huge idea that those with BPD in relationships are being taken advantage of, or as Sarah says later in the film as well, take advantage of their partners, which I think is very interesting since it's such a huge contrast on one end from the next, with opposite spectrums. I can't talk. But I want to say it really depends on the type of situation, the type of stage the individual is at with their BPD, because those with BPD do still deserve to find love. They do still deserve to have romantic and platonic relationships. Just because they have this disorder, it doesn't mean that they're incapable of forming healthy relationships. It's more so that they just need to go ahead and learn the coping skills necessary in order to put those symptoms into remission. Because otherwise, we can see certain parts of this movie that I'm dissecting now happen in real life and turn into toxic relationships where neither party will be happy in the end. And then later on at the party that Ian is discussing inviting Bear to, and is like, don't take Nikki, of course Bear says she won't leave me alone, which is similar to lines of having an FP, having the codependency of BPD. We at that party see Nikki kind of lose it, or at least Wish Nikki, that's my bad, Wish Nikki lose it, which results in seeing real Nikki come out for a moment, saying it's not me, and beginning to hit herself a lot, which also made me think a lot about how I felt like my splitting wasn't really me, and I wanted the real me to come out, but it was so hard. And that's why sometimes those with BPD may also resort to self-harm. And then, interestingly enough, during the hospital scene, if any of y'all in the comments have any ideas as to why the hospital didn't accept Nikki that aren't mine, please let me know, because I'm so curious and I can't find like a better idea at the moment. Now, like I said before, when it came to the 9 symptoms of BPD, or at least the main 9 symptoms, as the movie goes on, we later see Bear asking Nikki, is Nikki happy? Do you actually like me rather than love me? And of course, it goes along the same lines of the FP, the idealization. Those with BPD may tend to jump from knowing a person to loving them rather than actually liking them, I think, as well, which is also an interesting thought in general when it comes to these relationships with BPD, as well as like the honeymoon phase, because you may not truly know the person for what they are and like know their entire flaws as well, especially if you're glossing over them due to this idealization and then later learning about them and splitting on them as a result. The part that made me emotional in the theater was when Nikki is saying to Bear, "I can be whoever you want me to be." And I would say this is very common due to not having a sense of self when it comes to BPD. That's one of the main symptoms, and because of that, you may be more likely to engage in activities or begin to like activities people around you like, such as your friends or your partner, just because you don't know who you really are. And so you kind of take those traits from others rather than learning about them yourself. The last thing that I'm kind of going to discuss here, at least in this video, is when Nikki is talking about being alone in the bed. And she, in this scene, essentially compares being alone in bed to how she's going to die there and rot in that bed. I thought this was important to mention due to the fact that it is painful enough to want to die, to the point where you can even receive medical assistance for it. Or it can also be viewed as how those with BPD may go ahead and attempt, as most of them do have a history of that kind of thing, due to the fact that they're alone or their favorite partner may go ahead and be leaving them alone, even if it isn't intentionally. So I thought that scene was also important to highlight too in this. And interestingly enough, in the script that I found, this scene is a lot different. Rather than going ahead and going about her speech about being alone and dying in the bed, she instead insists to sleep with Bear, going on to say, "I'm normal, Bear." What? Nikki. "Hi, I'm normal, Bear." Nikki. "What the hell?" Nikki. "Rail me, I'm normal, Bear." "That's not normal." Nikki. "What do you want?" Bear. "I just want you to not act crazy." Nikki. "Well, if you love Nikki the way Nikki was, Nikki wouldn't have changed for you." And she says something else that I cannot say on camera on YouTube, but at the end she says sweetly, "Bear, what's a one-wish willow?" She smiles. Checkmate. And Bear says, "I don't know." So I thought that was really interesting to include, not necessarily related to the video, but just because I'm a big fan of this movie, and it's very interesting to see what was cut out once again and reading the type of story that's also going on in the script with the distinct or small differences. But ultimately, when viewed through the lens of BPD, obsession can be seen as what may happen when those with BPD don't get the help that they really need, help or treatment that they really need, as it can end in a toxic relationship on both parts where neither party is happy. However, like I said before, those with BPD still do deserve happy, loving, healthy relationships with both friends, family, romantic partners, etc. People with BPD are capable of forming healthy relationships. It just so happens that they may need to go ahead and get more help in order to do so. And that's it. Thank you for watching. This is my first video, so sorry for being a little bit weird, but yeah, that's all today. Bye guys. Happy Pride.